Welcome back to This is Thailand. Now, before I introduce today's story, I want to ask you something. When you see the title of this one, when you see those two numbers, 62 and 22, I know what you're thinking. I know because I thought the same thing when I first heard it, but I'm asking you to hold that thought for a while, because the man you're about to hear from isn't who you think he is. He isn't naive, he isn't desperate in any obvious way, and he isn't a fool. He's a retired plumber from County Roscommon in the west of Ireland. His name is Brendan. He spent 40 years fixing things for other people, and when the most important thing in his life broke, he did what a lot of men do. He got moving. He pointed himself somewhere warm and unfamiliar, and he told himself it was just a holiday. Or what happened over the following 8 months in Chiang Mai? Well, that's what we're here for. This one is going to stay with you. Not because it's the most dramatic story we've told on this channel, but because of how quiet it is, how recognizable, how easy it is to imagine yourself in his position if the circumstances were just a little different, if the timing was just a little off, if you were carrying just a little more than you could put down. Here's his story in his own words. I did the same job for 42 years. Plumber. Started as an apprentice at 16, retired at 58, came back and did a few more years of bits and pieces after that because I didn't know what else to do with myself. Call-outs mostly. Someone's boiler gone, a leak under the kitchen sink, a radiator that hadn't worked right since 1987. And that kind of thing. You wouldn't call it glamorous. I wouldn't call it glamorous. But I was good at it, and I like being good at something. There's a satisfaction in that. You go in, you find the problem, you fix it, you leave. The house is better than when you arrived. Simple enough. Máire used to say I was the only man she'd ever met who was more comfortable with his head under a sink than sitting at a dinner table. She wasn't wrong about that. She handled the social end of things. The neighbors, the school stuff when the kids were young, the birthday cards, all of it. I just showed up where she pointed me and tried not to say anything too thick. It worked well enough for 34 years. It suited us both, I think. She died on a Tuesday morning in April. She was hanging washing in the back garden. I was out in the van. Just finished a job in Athlone, heading home. By the time I pulled up to the house, the ambulance was already there. Heart attack, they said. No warning, nothing building, just gone. I rang the hospital twice to confirm it before I let myself believe them. Twice. The nurse on the second call was very patient with me about it. I still think about that. Some stranger being patient with a man who couldn't accept what she was telling him. I went back to work the following Monday. People didn't know what to say to me and I didn't know what to say to them, so the van was easier. Keep busy. That's what you do. That's what my father did when his brother died. That's what his father did. That's what we all do in the west of Ireland. And keep your head down and keep moving, and don't make too much of a fuss about the thing that's eating you from the inside. The kids. Sinead is in Melbourne, has been for 8 years. She rang every Sunday for a while, and then it became every fortnight, and then once a month, which is fine, that's normal, she has her own life. Siren is in Galway with his family, 2 small ones and a mortgage, and he did his best, but he didn't know what to do with me any more than I did. They loved their mother. We all loved their mother. But grief is a private thing in our family, and we didn't have the language for sharing it, so mostly we didn't. I lasted 18 months in the house. I thought I'd be grand. I thought I'd fix it up, repaint the kitchen, sort the guttering, keep myself busy. And I did all of that, and it didn't help at all, because it wasn't a practical problem. Her coat was still on the hook in the hall. I couldn't move it, and I couldn't leave it there, so mostly I just didn't look at the hall. Walked past it with my eyes straight ahead, like a man pretending a thing doesn't exist. In the end, I sold it. Got a fair price. Moved into a flat in the town, and that was worse actually. At least the house had her in it somewhere. The flat was just a flat. I had the money from the sale, about 155,000 euros after costs. And the pension, which isn't a fortune, but covers the basics. I was 62 years old in reasonable health, with nowhere particular to be. Which sounds like freedom and felt like the opposite. Paddy Connolly was the one who put Thailand in my head. He'd been a guard, a police officer, in the town for 30 years, Ed retired a few years before me, and he'd started spending his winters abroad when his wife got tired of the cold. Not together, mind you. She went to her sister in Cork. He went to Chiang Mai, 3 winters in a row by the time he was telling me about it. He'd come back in April looking like a different man, tanned, relaxed, half a stone lighter from all the walking. I wasn't really listening the first few times he talked about it. It seemed like someone else's kind of thing. I'd been to Lanzarote twice, in a package holiday in Portugal that rained for 4 days. Thailand was something young people did with backpacks, or else something you read about in the newspapers for the wrong reasons. But Paudy wasn't a dramatic man, and he wasn't selling anything. He just kept describing it in practical terms. And the flight was about 12 hours with a connection in the Gulf somewhere. A decent guest house was €30 a night if you weren't fussy. The food was cheap and good, and you could eat from street stalls for almost nothing. The weather in November and December was warm but not stupid. And this was the thing that landed. Nobody there knew your name, or your business, or how you were getting on since the wife died. You were just another pale fellow with a bag, same as the rest of them. I booked the flight one evening in September. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold, and I just did it. Didn't ring Kieran first. Didn't ask anyone. Booked the flight, booked 2 weeks at a guest house Paudy had recommended near the old city, and closed the laptop. 4 weeks, I told myself. See how it goes. I told Kieran the following day. He asked a few questions, and I answered them in a way that technically told him nothing. He said, "Mind yourself." I said I would. That was that. The flight landed early in the morning, local time. I was stiff from the seats, and I hadn't slept properly, and I came out of the arrivals hall into this noise, heat, the smell of something frying somewhere, 100 people all moving in different directions. I stood there for a moment, feeling quite sincerely like I'd made a terrible mistake. But the guest house was fine. Small room, clean, run by a Thai family who smiled at me and showed me where things were, and then left me alone entirely, which was exactly what I needed. I slept for 12 hours the first day. Woke up, it was dark, I couldn't tell if it was evening or early morning. Went back to sleep. He woke up again, and it was morning, proper morning, and there were birds outside and the sound of a motorbike somewhere and something that smelled like garlic and chili being cooked nearby. I lay there for a bit, and I realized I hadn't thought about the coat on the hook. Not once. Not when I woke up, which had been the thing for nearly 2 years. That first awful moment of consciousness, before you're fully awake, when you remember again. It just wasn't there. I don't know why. Change of scene, maybe. Exhaustion, something in the air. It was a small thing. It was the first small good thing in a long time. I got up and went out to find some breakfast and figure out where I was. The guest house was on a lane off Ratchadamnoan Road, which I couldn't pronounce for the first 2 weeks and eventually just called the main road in my head. The family who ran it, a woman in her 50s and what I assumed was her sister, had a little spirit house out front, one of those small ornate things on a pedestal with offerings on it, tiny plastic elephants and a cup of something. I walked past it every morning and every evening, and after a while I started noticing when someone had freshened it up. I don't know why that detail stayed with me. It just seemed like a decent thing, tending to something. That first week I had no plan, which was unusual for me. I'm a man who works from a list. Job 1, job 2, job 3, tick them off. But I had nowhere to be and nothing to fix, and for the first few days that felt wrong. Like the holiday feeling you get on the first morning before your body catches up and realizes it can stop. And then gradually it stopped feeling wrong and started feeling like something else. Not peace exactly, but the absence of pressure, which was close enough. I walked. That was mostly what I did. Out from the guest house in the morning after whatever was being sold at the stall 2 doors down, usually cow tom, a kind of rice soup, thin and mild, not what I'd have chosen back home, but it sat well at 7 in the morning in the heat. Then just walking. The old city is a square, more or less, with a moat around it, and I walked the moat roads several mornings in a row, watching the monks in their orange robes doing their rounds before the day got going, the shopkeepers hosing down their frontages, the motorbike taxis in their orange vests clustered at corners waiting for fares. Nobody bothered me. A few people nodded. That was plenty. I got lost twice, properly lost, both times in the tangle of lanes inside the old city walls where the temples are. There's a lot of temples, Watts they call them. I walked into one by accident on the third day and stood there for a while, not knowing what to do with myself. And a young monk smiled at me and I smiled back. And that was the whole interaction, and it was fine. More than fine, actually. I think I needed to be somewhere with no social expectations for a while. The food took some getting used to, not in a bad way, just in the way of unfamiliarity. I ate pad thai from a street cart and couldn't finish it the first time because of the chili, which I underestimated considerably. The woman serving it watched me go red and handed me a bottle of water without being asked and then turned back to her wok. The second time I ordered, I pointed at the chili jar and shook my head, and she nodded, and that was us sorted. I ate there 4 or 5 more times that first week. Chang beer in the evenings, sat outside somewhere, watching the street. Cheap, about 50 or 60 baht a bottle, less than €2. Paddy hadn't exaggerated about that part. One rang nobody. Sent Kiran a brief message on the 4th day to say I'd arrived safely and the place was grand. He replied with a thumbs up. That was the extent of it. I didn't feel guilty about the silence. I'd been surrounded by people who didn't know what to say to me for nearly 2 years, and the quiet was genuinely a relief. By the end of the first week, I was sleeping 8 hours most nights. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't a small thing. I found the coffee shop on the Friday of that first week. When I'd been using a cafe near the guest house that was fine but loud with backpackers and had a menu laminated in 4 languages, which put me off slightly. I was walking along the road that runs inside the south wall, looking for somewhere to sit down with a paper map. I'd bought a paper map. Yes, I'm that age, it worked fine. And I saw a small place set back from the road a bit, half a dozen tables. No signs in English beyond a handwritten card saying coffee in the window. Not a tourist operation. I went in. It was quiet. Dark wood, a slow ceiling fan, a glass cabinet with Thai pastries in it. The smell of proper coffee, not the instant stuff. 2 women working. One older, one young. The young one came over. She was small, dark hair pulled back, wearing a plain green t-shirt. I'd put her at early 20s. And she said something in Thai, and I said, in my best attempt at the word Paddy had written down for me phonetically on a piece of paper I'd been carrying around like a talisman, Kafai Ron, which is just hot coffee, and she paused, and then she laughed. Not unkindly. The way you laugh when a child pronounces something unexpected. She said something back in Thai and held up one finger, meaning one, I assumed, and I said yes, and she went behind the counter. She brought the coffee over, and I said, Cob kun crap, which is thank you, one of the other 3 phrases I had, and she stopped and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Amusement, maybe, or just mild surprise, and said something that I gathered meant my pronunciation was terrible, but that she appreciated the effort. And then she brought me a small glass of water I hadn't asked for and went back to work. I drank the coffee. It was good, strong, the way I like it. I sat there for an hour with the map and didn't feel like I needed to be anywhere else. I came back the next morning, and the one after that, her nickname, I learned later, because Thai people generally go by nicknames, was Nok. It means bird. She worked the morning shift most days, sometimes with the older woman, sometimes with another girl about the same age. She was 22, I found out eventually. At that point, I didn't know and hadn't asked. She was young, that I could see. But the place was a coffee shop 5 minutes from my guest house that made good coffee and left me alone, and I wasn't thinking about much beyond that. Sure, the third morning she put a second small coffee on my table when I nearly finished the first one. Didn't charge me for it. Just set it down as she was passing. I said the Cob kun crap again, working on the pronunciation, and this time she stopped and corrected me. Gently, slowly, the right sound, and had me repeat it until I got it closer. Then she nodded and went off. Satisfied, like a teacher whose student has done the minimum acceptable work. I thought about that on the way back to the guest house. Not in any significant way. Just, it was a normal human interaction. Someone patient with my ignorance, taking a moment to be useful. I hadn't had many of those lately. I went back the next morning. By the start of the second week, I'd stopped thinking of it as the coffee shop and started thinking of it as just where I went in the mornings. That's a small distinction, but it matters. Habits form without you noticing, and then one day you notice. The conversations began properly around day 10 or 11, I think. She had a translation app on her phone. I learned later that half of Chiang Mai runs on translation apps, and she started using it to ask me things when the shop was quiet. Not flirtatiously, more like a person who was curious and had found a practical tool for satisfying that curiosity. Where was I from? Was it cold there? What did I do for work? I told her I was a plumber, which required 2 attempts through the app because the first translation gave her something she didn't recognize. When it landed, she found it genuinely funny, not rude about it, just the kind of laugh you do when something is not what you expected. Then she asked, through the app, how it worked. The pipes, the water, how you got water to come out of a tap. I explained about pressure, water pressure, gravity, the basic logic of it. She listened and asked a follow-up question about tall buildings. She'd watched something on her phone about skyscrapers and how they got water to the top floors. And I just sat there for a moment because nobody had asked me a question about my trade with genuine curiosity in, I don't know how long. Years. Máire had stopped asking about jobs by the time the kids were teenagers. You run out of things to say about plumbing eventually, and both parties just accept it. I told her about pressure pumps, booster systems. She nodded slowly. Whether she understood fully, I couldn't say, but she was paying attention, and that was enough. I want to be clear about something here, and I'll be honest, even if it doesn't reflect well on me. I knew what this looked like. I'm not a man without self-awareness. 62 years old, sitting in a coffee shop in Thailand, talking to a 22-year-old girl about water pressure. I know what Kieran would have said. I know what the lads back home would have said. I'd heard all the versions of that story before I ever boarded the plane. But here's the thing. She was sometimes short with customers who were rude to her. I watched that. She had a way of going very polite and very flat at the same time when someone spoke to her badly. Not quite rude back, but closed, like a door that has been quietly shut. She looked tired some mornings. The kind of tired that isn't about sleep, the kind that comes from carrying something. And she didn't perform anything with me. She didn't laugh too much or stand too close or do any of the things I'd half expected to see and half dreaded seeing. She was just there, a real person doing a job. That was the thing I kept coming back to. She seemed real. It was the middle of the second week when I told her about Máire. I hadn't planned to. We'd been talking through the app about something to do with her college course. She was doing a business qualification 1 or 2 evenings a week. She'd mentioned it a few days earlier. And she asked if I had family. Children, I said 2. Grown. She asked about my wife. I said she'd died. 2 years ago, I said. Heart attack. She went quiet, which in itself felt right. Some people, when you tell them that, immediately start saying words, filling the space with sounds. She didn't do that. She looked at the table for a moment and then looked back at me and asked through the phone whether she had been a good woman. I said yes. She was a good woman. She nodded, just once. And then she picked up my empty cup and went to get a refill I hadn't asked for. I think about that exchange more than I'd care to admit. It was such a simple question. Was she a good woman? Not I'm sorry for your loss or that must have been terrible or how are you coping? Just the thing that actually mattered. Cut straight to it. Either that was natural intelligence and genuine feeling, or it was something she'd learned to do. I still don't know which. Both possibilities are uncomfortable in different ways. Over the following days, I told her small things. That Máire had handled everything social and I'd handled everything practical, which she found amusing in a quiet way. That my daughter was in Australia and my son was nearby but busy with his own life. That I'd never been anywhere further than Lanzarote before this. She told me small things too. That she was from Udon Thani originally, up in the northeast. That she'd come to Chiang Mai 3 years ago for work and the course. That her family were farmers, more or less. That she sent money home when she could, but 9,000 baht a month, about 230 euros, didn't stretch far in 2 directions. That last detail sat with me. not as information at the time, just as a fact about her life. I noticed somewhere around day 14 that I was walking to the coffee shop faster than I walked anywhere else. That's not a romantic thing exactly. It's just, I had something to look forward to, which was not something I'd had for a while. I went back to the guest house one afternoon and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about it carefully. The way I think about things, slowly and without rushing. I listed the reasons to be sensible. I listed the reasons the situation was not what it appeared. I thought about what Paddy would say, what Siren would say, what the version of myself from 10 years ago would say. And then I thought about the way she'd asked, was she a good woman? The simplicity of it, the way it had gone straight to the part one actually needed to talk about. I booked another 3 weeks at the guest house the following morning. I told myself it was because the weather was good and the cost was low and I'd nothing waiting for me at home. All of that was true, none of it was the whole reason. I knew that, I booked it anyway. The extra 3 weeks changed the shape of things. When you're a tourist somewhere, everything is temporary and that gives you a kind of permission. Permission not to get attached, permission to just observe. When you extend your stay a second time, you've made a different kind of decision, even if you don't call it that. We started spending time outside the coffee shop around the start of week 5. It happened gradually. She mentioned one evening through the app that there was a night market near the East Gate that was good on Saturdays, not too touristy. I said I'd probably have a look. She said she'd be going herself after her shift. Neither of us made it into a plan exactly, but we both turned up. It was busy the way those markets are. Stalls selling everything from grilled corn to silk scarves to phone cases. See the smell of mooping, those little pork skewers on charcoal, and the sweet smell of mango sticky rice from a cart near the entrance. She navigated it like she knew every stall, which she probably did, pointed out things she thought I should try, told me what to avoid. I tried a bowl of cow soy, a northern curry noodle thing, rich and slightly spicy, and it was the best thing I'd eaten since arriving. I told her so, and she seemed genuinely pleased, like I'd passed some kind of test. We walked, that was mostly it. Talking through the app when words were needed, sometimes just walking in a comfortable quiet. I'm not a man who needs to fill silence. Apparently she wasn't either. I paid for things. Dinner, the market food, a song thai back toward the old city. That felt natural to me. She earned 9,000 baht a month. I had a pension and 155,000 euros sitting in an Irish bank account. The gap was obvious, and I wasn't pretending it wasn't there. I wasn't buying her company, I told myself. I was just covering what was reasonable, given the difference. That's a thought I've turned over many times since. Was I rationalizing something? Yes, probably. But it also wasn't entirely wrong. The asymmetry was real. The first month, all in, dinners, the Saturday market, a day trip up to Doi Suthep, the big temple on the mountain above the city, where we walked up the 300 steps in the morning before the worst of the heat, and a couple of smaller things. I'd say somewhere between 15 and 20,000 baht, about 400 euros. Spread across weeks, it felt like very little. It was very little. When the day trip up Doi Suthep, I want to mention because it was, well, she brought fruit in a bag, rambutan and longan. We sat on the terrace of the temple and looked out over the city spread below and ate the fruit, and she told me something about the temple, the legend of how it was built, an elephant carrying a relic until it stopped, and that's where they built. I'm probably getting the details wrong, but she told it carefully, making sure I understood, checking through the app when the words got complicated. Like she wanted me to actually know it, not just nod along. I don't know. It was a good day. I'm allowed to say that. Then her mother. It was a Tuesday morning, about 6 weeks in. Knock came in for her shift looking off. Not upset exactly, but quieter than usual, and after a while she showed me her phone. A line message. The messaging app everyone uses here, from her sister. A photo of a hospital admission form. Her mother had been brought in the previous night. Something respiratory, they thought. Not critical, but not nothing. They'd need to run tests, keep her in for a few days at least. I want to be precise here because I've thought about it a lot. She did not ask me for anything. She showed me the message the way you'd show someone, something that was worrying you, looking for, I don't know, acknowledgement. She went back to work. She didn't follow it up. I'm the one who brought it up 20 minutes later. I asked through the app what the hospital bills would be like. She said she didn't know yet. She seemed reluctant to say more, which I now understand could have been genuine reluctance or could have been something else. At the time, I took it as genuine. I asked her to find out and let me know. 2 days later, she showed me an invoice on her phone, typed out on a hospital letterhead in Thai, itemized in the way hospital bills are. Tests, bed charges, medication, that kind of thing. I couldn't read a word of it, but it looked like a real document. I've seen enough invoices in my working life to recognize the shape of one. And the total at the bottom was 80,000 baht, about 2,100 euros. I gave it to her. I transferred it through her bank account details she gave me on a piece of paper. She cried when I told her. Properly. Not dramatically. She turned away and put her hand over her face the way people do when they're embarrassed to be seen. I said it was fine. She shook her head and said something I didn't understand, and the app translated it roughly as something like, "Don't be too kind to me." I didn't know what to do with that, so I just said it was fine again. I felt useful. That's the word. Not generous, not romantic, useful. Like the problem had a solution and I had the means to solve it. That feeling, I can't overstate how much I'd missed it. For 2 years, I'd been a man standing in rooms where the problem had no practical solution and no tool in the van was going to help. This was different. This I could fix. A month later, she told me she was thinking of leaving the job. The hours were long, the pay was poor, and with her mother's health uncertain, she was worried about the course falling behind. She said it matter-of-factly, not asking for anything. It's just telling me something that was happening in her life. And I heard myself say, and this is the part that tells you everything about where I was at. I heard myself say that I could help cover her basic expenses for a while she focused on the course. 15,000 baht a month, about 400 euros, for as long as she needed. She didn't immediately say yes. She sat with it for a moment and said something that the app translated as, "That's too much trouble for you." I said it wasn't. She accepted. I want to be clear about one more thing. I did not feel taken advantage of. At any point in that conversation, I felt needed. And being needed, honestly, after 2 years of being nobody's problem to solve, being needed felt like something worth paying for. I know how that sounds. I'm telling you anyway because it's true. I went back to Ireland in February. I want to mention that because I think it matters. I wasn't a man who disappeared entirely. I still had a life there technically. Tax stuff, pension administration, a few things that needed sorting in person. I flew back, spent 11 days in the flat in the town, saw Sharon for dinner once, had a pint with Paddy who asked how Thailand was without asking too much, and then flew back to Chiang Mai. Sharon asked at dinner whether I was seeing someone. I said not really. He nodded. He's a careful man, Sharon, doesn't push. I appreciated that, and also I was using it, which I'm not proud of. I told him the truth in the narrowest possible sense and left the rest of it in Thailand. By March, the arrangement had a shape. We spent 3 or 4 days a week together. She stayed at the guest house 2 or 3 nights most weeks. The family who ran it had clearly worked out what was happening and said nothing, which is a very Thai response to situations that aren't their business. We'd eat together in the evenings, usually something simple from the stalls near the moat, or occasionally a proper sit-down meal at a little place on Ratchapakanai Road that did decent larb. She was learning a few words of English by then, slowly, from her phone. I was learning slightly more Thai, also slowly. We met somewhere in the awkward middle and managed. I knew what we were. I'm not going to pretend I was naive about the financial dimension. I was paying her 15,000 baht a month, about 400 euros. That's not a boyfriend paying for dinner. That's a different arrangement, and I understood that. But I also thought, I still think, that there was something else in there too. She laughed at things I said. She remembered details I'd mentioned weeks earlier and referred back to them. She brought me things. Once a small bottle of Tiger Balm when I mentioned my knee was bothering me. Once a mango she'd picked up at the market because she knew I liked them. Small things. Either she was maintaining a fiction very carefully over several months, or some of it was just what it looked like. And that's the part one can't resolve. I've stopped trying. I kept the notebook from the start. It's a habit from the trade. Log the job, log the cost. Every transfer I made to her, I wrote down. By the time I got back from Ireland, I'd paid out 80,000 baht for the hospital, roughly 120,000 in monthly payments across the first 8 months. That's 3,200 euros total so far. Not ruinous on a pension and the house money, less than I'd have spent on a modest car back home. Then the house. It came up in late March. She showed me photos on her phone. Her family's place in the village outside Udon Thani, about 4 hours northeast by bus. The photos were of the roof mostly. Corrugated metal sheeting that had lifted and rusted and let in water. The floor inside was concrete, cracked in places, the tiles buckled in one corner from moisture. I could see exactly what was wrong, and I knew what the repair looked like. It was a real job, not a complicated one. A re-roofing and a re-tile, the kind of thing a decent local builder would knock over in a week, but a real job that needed doing. She told me what the quotes were. I asked her to show me the paperwork, and she did. 2 written estimates from builders in Thai, with amounts at the bottom. I had no way to verify them, but I've priced enough jobs to recognize the ballpark on a straightforward residential repair. The total she was looking at was 280,000 baht, about 7,400 euros. In 2 transfers, she said, one for materials up front and one when the work was done. A tradesman's eye is both a gift and a problem in situations like this. The problem is you know enough to find the estimate credible and not enough to know if it's real. I looked at those photos and I saw a roof that needed replacing. I saw a floor that needed tiles. I saw work I could have done myself if I had the tools and the crew. The numbers were plausible, so I said yes. I transferred the first installment, 140,000 baht, won about 3,700 euros, in early April. The second installment went in May, when she showed me a photo on her phone of what she said was the work in progress, a new roof going up. I can't tell you if that photo was of her family's house or some other house entirely. I never went to see it. I want to say that again. I never saw the house. She invited me, technically, said I could come up and visit the village when things were more presentable. Her family would be embarrassed to receive me with the work half finished. She explained this carefully, something about face, about how it would feel to her parents to have a guest see the house in that state. I understood that. It made cultural sense to me and I accepted it without pushing. I think about it sometimes, that I never pushed. A man with 40 years fixing other people's houses who didn't insist on seeing the house he just paid to repair. I had reasons for not pushing. None of them were good enough. One evening around this time, I was sitting on the small terrace outside my guest house room, just a couple of plastic chairs and a low wall, but I'd taken to sitting there in the evenings with a Leo beer and watching the lane. And it occurred to me quite clearly that I had never in 8 months met a single person from her life. Not a colleague, not a friend, not family, nobody. Every person she mentioned existed as a name in conversations through a translation app. Her mother, her sister, her college classmates. I had no face for any of them. I sat with that thought for a while, and then I set it aside. I'm telling you this not to make myself look foolish, though I understand it does. I'm telling you because I think that's what you do when you want something to be true. You notice the gap and you put your hand over it and you don't press. You keep the shape of the thing intact. The monthly payments were still going. The house was theoretically being fixed. The notebook was filling up. And then around that same time, she mentioned her mother's health again. Said she'd had a checkup. Some trouble with her joints now, pain in her knees, the doctor had prescribed something. I listened and said I hoped she'd be feeling better. It was only later, weeks later, that I remembered the original hospital bill had been for something respiratory. A chest infection, I'd thought. Lungs. Now it was joints. Different thing entirely. 2 different problems. On neither of them referenced in relation to the other, as if they were unconnected visits to unconnected doctors. I noted it. I didn't ask about it. I told myself illnesses are complicated and older people have multiple things wrong with them at once. Which is true. I told myself a lot of things that were technically true. I joined the hiking group in June, which was month 7. One of the men at the guest house had mentioned it, a retired Canadian who came and went, did a few months a year in Chiang Mai. He said there was a group that went out Saturday mornings, trails outside the city, nothing too serious. Mostly older fellows, he said. Good for getting out of your own head. That was accurate on both counts. There were usually 8 or 10 of us, different nationalities, different situations. We're all at roughly the same stage of life where you've stopped being in a hurry to get somewhere and started being more interested in just moving. We'd meet near the Tha Phi gate at 7 before the heat built up and take a song theo out to one of the trails in the hills around the city. Nobody talked much on the trails. Afterwards, a few of us would stop for food or a beer somewhere on the way back in. That was the extent of it. I liked it. I'm not a man who makes friends quickly, but I'm capable of being comfortable around people without needing to be close to them. The group suited that perfectly. Hans I'd been aware of for about 6 weeks before we had a proper conversation. Dutch, mid-50s, had the look of a man who'd been somewhere warm for a long time. Properly tanned, not tourist tanned. He worked remotely. Something to do with software. Didn't require much explanation. He spoke functional Thai, which I'd noticed because occasionally he'd translate a menu or sort out a payment problem without making a production of it. 9 years in Chiang Mai, I learned eventually. He knew the city the way you only know a place if you've stopped being a visitor. The Saturday in question was the second week of July. We'd done a trail out past the Mesa Valley, a good few hours, and came back into the city in the early afternoon. 4 or 5 of us ended up at a roadside place near the Niman area. Plastic tables under a corrugated awning, big bottles of Leo, the smell of something grilling nearby. Brendan and Hans ended up at the same end of the table. The others were talking about visa runs, somebody's upcoming trip to Chiang Mai. Hans and I were a bit removed from that conversation. He asked where I was from. I said Ireland. He said he'd been once to Dublin for a conference. Thought it rained a lot. I said that was accurate. We talked about nothing much for a while. Then the conversation shifted, the way it does after a couple of beers, to Isan, the Northeast. He'd mentioned having spent time up there years back. A previous relationship, he said, without details. I mentioned that the woman I was seeing was from that area, Udon Thani, a village outside. I didn't say much more than that. He asked whereabouts. I told him. And then, because I'd heard her refer to her family by surname often enough, I mentioned the family name. Hans paused, not dramatically. Just a slight stop, the way you pause when something registers unexpectedly. He said the name back to me, and with a slight question in it, said he thought he might know the family, through his ex-girlfriend's circle, years back. Small world in those villages, he said. Everyone's connected to everyone. I said yes, probably. He said as far as he knew, her mother had always been in good health. Healthy woman. That was how he put it. Healthy woman as far as he knew. Said it the way you'd say any inconsequential fact about a person you'd heard of, but never really known. Then he said, and I want to be exact about this because I've replayed it enough times. He said that Nok had a fella in the village, a Thai man, long-term, known about. He said it the way you'd mention that someone drives a particular kind of car. Just a thing that was the case. He had no idea what he was telling me. He was just filling in the small talk. I drank some of my beer. I asked a couple of follow-up questions. Careful ones. What part of the village was the family from? Did he know what they farmed? Hans answered them easily, filling in small details, still not registering that anything had changed at our end of the table. After a few minutes, the conversation moved on. The Canadian said something, and Hans turned to respond, and that was that. I finished my beer. I said I had things to do. I thanked everyone for the walk and got a song thou back toward the old city. What I felt, and I've thought about this a lot trying to be honest about it, was very little. That's the thing that stays with me. Not shock, not rage, not grief exactly. It was more like when you're working on a system and you find the fault, and the fault explains everything that hadn't been adding up, Máire, and there's a moment that's almost mechanical, the click of something fitting into place. Oh, that's where the pressure loss was coming from. Of course, her mother's illness that changed conditions, The college course that kept shifting, the village I'd never been invited to, the fact that I'd never met a single person from her life outside the time she spent with me. None of it had been definitive on its own. All of it fit now. I sat on the terrace at the guest house for a long time that evening. The lane was doing what it always does at that hour. A few motorbikes, the smell of something frying from the stall at the end, a dog lying in the gutter looking philosophical about it. Ordinary evening. I had a Leo beer, and I watched it, and I thought about things without arriving at any particular conclusion. I did not message Knock that night. I thought about what I would say if I confronted her. I'm not a confrontational man by nature. 40 years of call-outs teaches you to diagnose first and only say what you've actually established. What had Hans established exactly? That her mother was healthy as far as he knew, that there was a Thai boyfriend known about, second-hand knowledge from a man with loose connections to the family from years back. None of it was something I could put in front of her as proof. She would deny it or explain it or cry. An argument that produced nothing verifiable and ended nothing cleanly. I am also, if I'm being completely honest, a man who had already put 14,000 euros into this situation and was not entirely sure he wanted the full answer confirmed out loud. So I sat on the terrace. I watched the lane. I finished the beer. And I didn't call her. On the week after the conversation with Hans, I behaved normally, or as close to normally as I could manage, which I think was close enough. I'm not an expressive man at the best of times, and whatever I was feeling, and I'm still not entirely sure what to call it, it didn't show. I saw Knock twice that week. We ate together, walked a bit, sat on the terrace in the evenings. I was quieter than usual, maybe. She didn't remark on it. The following month's transfer was due at the start of August. I sent 8,000 baht instead of 15,000. About 200 euros, half the usual amount. I gave no explanation. She messaged online 2 days later. Are you okay, Bren? Did something happen? I said I'd had some unexpected expenses back home. Pension administration, I said. She said okay and that she hoped everything was sorted soon. She accepted it. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She accepted the explanation without pushing. I'd said I had expenses, and she'd said okay. I don't know what to read into that. Maybe she trusted me. Maybe she had other arrangements that covered the gap. I genuinely don't know. The following month, I transferred nothing. She messaged on the 3rd of the month. Are you okay, Bren? I sat with the message for a while before I answered. I typed, grand, yeah, just sorting some things. She replied with a small heart emoji, the way Thai people do online when they don't have words for something, but want to acknowledge it. I put my phone down. She messaged twice more over the next fortnight. Both times I gave her some version of grand, just busy. On the 2nd of the following month, there was no message. And then nothing. I opened the notebook the following week and added up the figures. I do this the way I do everything. Methodically from the beginning. No gaps. The initial outlay on meals and trips, roughly 15,000 baht. The hospital bill, 80,000. The monthly payments across 8 months, 120,000. The house, 280,000. Total, 495,000 baht. At the rate I was paying, that came to 14,300 euros, give or take. I looked at that number for a while. Then I closed the notebook. It's not nothing. I want to be clear about that. 14,000 euros is not an amount a man on a pension and a fixed pot of savings dismisses without thinking. But it's also not ruinous. The house money is largely intact. The pension covers the guest house and the food and the Leo beers on the terrace and the Saturday hikes and a flight back to Ireland if I need one. I'm not broke. I'm not even close to broke. What I lost that's harder to account for is the other thing, the particular quality of the hope I arrived with. I didn't come to Thailand looking for a relationship. I want to be precise about that. I came because I needed to be somewhere different and couldn't sit in the flat any longer, and Paudie's photos looked warm. But somewhere in those 8 months, without quite planning it, I'd started believing that something simple was still available to me. Not love exactly. I'm 62 and I'm not a romantic, but something in that territory. Warmth. Company that felt like it was for me rather than for the money attached to me. The possibility that the remainder of my life didn't have to be entirely solitary. That's what I lost, and I can't put a number on it. I've thought about Knock a great deal since. Not bitterly. That's the honest truth. She was 22, from a farming family in Udon Thani, sending money home on 9,000 baht a month. She had a Thai boyfriend in the village who presumably knew the arrangement existed and tolerated it because that's sometimes how it works. The farang is a financial resource and the local relationship is the real one, and both things are understood by everyone involved except the farang. That's not a pleasant thing to discover about yourself. But her poverty was real and her options were limited, and I can't hold against a 22-year-old the choices she made to survive. And even if those choices cost me 14,000 euros in 8 months and a specific quality of hope. Both things can be true. She may have liked me. She was certainly also using me. I've stopped trying to decide which one was more real. Sharon rang at Christmas. We talked for 20 minutes. His kids, his job, the weather in Galway. Siniad's plans to visit from Melbourne in the spring. At the end, he asked when I was thinking of coming home. I said I didn't know. There was a pause and he said, okay, and I said I'd ring him in the new year. I'm still in the guest house. Same room, same plastic chairs on the terrace, same spirit house at the front that the woman freshens every morning. I got a Thai retirement visa sorted earlier this year. I turned 65 in March, had to show 800,000 baht in a Thai bank account, only which required opening the account and moving some of the house money across for the required period. Bit of a process. Hans helped me with the paperwork. We still go on the Saturday walks. I've started doing occasional plumbing jobs. A Thai contractor named Somchai brings me in when something is beyond the local expertise. A pressure problem in an expat-owned guest house, a boiler installation in a boutique hotel near Niman that the regular guys couldn't get right. I charge very little. The work is straightforward and I'm good at it, and it gives me something to do with my hands, which I need. I don't know if I'll go home. There's nothing specific waiting for me in Roscommon. Sharon has his life and Siniad has hers, and the flat in the town is still there, being paid for by a direct debit, holding nothing. Well, here I have the terrace and the lane and the cow Tom in the mornings, and the Saturday walks and Sumchai ringing me when a pressure valve wants looking at. It's not a full life, but it's not an empty one either. If you're watching this and you're thinking about coming here, thinking about it the way I was thinking about it, which is to say carrying something heavy and hoping a different place might make it lighter, I'd say this: it might. It might genuinely help for a while. The distance does something. The anonymity does something. I slept properly for the first time in 2 years in that small room off Ratchadamnoan Road, and I haven't forgotten that. But grief is visible. That's the thing I tell you. I thought I was just a man on a holiday. I was, in fact, a man with everything written on him for anyone who knew how to read it. The loneliness, the need to be useful, the willingness to believe. All of it visible if you knew what to look for. I'm not saying Thai people are predatory. Most aren't. What I'm saying is that loneliness makes you want to believe things. And wanting to believe things is, in the end, a choice. I made that choice several times with my eyes open. That's on me. I'd rather say so plainly than dress it up as something more dignified. Loneliness is the most expensive thing I've ever carried. And I've carried some heavy things. That's Brendan's story. A quiet man who came to Thailand looking for some distance from grief and found instead 8 months and 14,000 euros worth of something that felt like connection and turned out to be more complicated than that. And what makes his story worth telling isn't the money lost, or the woman, or even the discovery. It's the honesty with which he looks back at himself. Not as a victim, not as a fool. Just as a man who wanted something and paid for the wanting. Here at This Is Thailand, we tell these stories because they're real, and they happen to decent people, and because the warning is only useful if you understand how it happens to someone like Brendan. Not to the naive, not to the reckless, to the quiet man sitting at the right table at the wrong time, carrying just a little more than he could put down. If Brendan's story resonated with you, leave a comment below. If you know someone who's thinking about making the same journey, share this with them. And if you're already in Thailand navigating something like this, you're not alone and you're not a fool. You're just human. We'll see you on the next one. And This Is Thailand.